The world thought Eliana had it all. She walked through the city streets in heels that clicked confidence with every step, dressed in sleek black coats that fit like armor. Her face, flawless. Her voice, measured. Her posture, unshaken. No one questioned the illusion. No one saw the tremble she buried behind her lips, or the way her hands clenched when no one was looking. To the world, she was strong, unbothered, untouchable. But every night, when the makeup was washed off and the door to her apartment clicked shut, the mask cracked, and the real Eliana stared back from the mirror. A girl who cried silently into her pillow. A woman who battled shame that came from wounds too deep to name. A soul who didn't recognize herself anymore. She remembered when the darkness first crept in. It was subtle, like a whisper in the hallway, a chill in the air. A lie disguised as a thought. You're not enough. Then another. You're too broken to be loved. At first, she fought back. She quoted affirmations. She forced smiles. She posted perfect photos. She drowned herself in productivity. But the shadows were patient. They knew her cracks. They waited for her weakest moment. That moment came on a Thursday night. Eliana sat on her kitchen floor, knees drawn to her chest, mascara staining her cheeks. Her phone lay across from her. 5 unread messages from people who loved her, and yet none of them could reach the deep well of emptiness inside. She whispered, God, if you're real, do you even see me? Silence. Until a knock, but not from the door. It came from within her chest. A sudden, soft thump. Not her heartbeat. Something else. Something eternal. And then a voice, not loud, not thunderous, but still unmistakably divine. I see you. The real you. And I'm not turning away. Eliana gasped and looked around. Nothing. No figure. No light from heaven. But something had shifted. A warmth had entered the room, one that didn't come from a heater or candlelight. It came from presence. Holy, unshakable, gentle. She closed her eyes and began to sob. Not from fear, but from the overwhelming truth that after years of hiding, someone had finally seen her. Not the curated version, not the mass performance, but her. And he didn't flinch. She didn't sleep that night. She just lay in bed, eyes open to the ceiling, reliving the moment. That voice, that feeling, that whisper of eternity that touched her humanity and didn't recoil. In the morning, everything looked the same. Her walls were still white. Her fridge still empty. Her phone still buzzed with deadlines. But something was different. She stood in front of the mirror, barefaced, hair unbrushed, and whispered, Do you really see me? The mirror didn't speak, but her heart did. A quiet assurance rose from deep within her ribcage. I saw you in your pain, and I still called you mine. She fell to her knees. Later that day, Eliana found herself walking into a small chapel 2 blocks from her office. It was a place she used to pass by without a second glance. But now it pulled her like gravity. She sat in the last pew, hands trembling. The chapel was nearly empty. Just one elderly man lighting a candle and a young girl sketching in a notebook. Eliana closed her eyes. She didn't know what to pray. She didn't know how, so she didn't speak. She just listened, and the silence met her like an embrace. Until once again a whisper, I know everything, and I still chose you. It broke her. She wept, messy, unashamed tears that had been stored behind her eyes for years. She wept for the girl who was abused, for the teen who was betrayed, for the woman who carried everyone's burdens but her own. She wept for the mistakes, the self-hate, the addictions she never spoke of, the nights she wondered if disappearing would hurt less than staying. And in that release, she felt arms around her. Not literal ones, but undeniable. Presence. The kind that didn't need a body to be real. The kind that whispered to her weary soul, You were never too far gone. You were never too ugly to redeem. You were never too much, or not enough. I saw it all, and I stayed. That was the beginning, the unraveling, the sacred undoing of a life built on pretense. Eliana began to journal again, not for aesthetics, not to post online, but for truth. She wrote letters to God. She wrote letters from him, She filled pages with pain and promises, with questions and glimpses of answers. Each night, she'd light a single candle and say, "I'm still here. Are you?" And every single time, something would happen. A peace would settle. A memory would return. A lie would get exposed. And the voice would whisper something so specific it cracked her soul open wider. That memory? I was there. You weren't alone. That shame? I nailed it to the cross. That voice in your head? It's not mine. She began to change. Not overnight. Not perfectly. But deeply. She found herself deleting old photos, walking away from toxic friendships, canceling empty commitments. She began making space, because he was filling it. And every time she looked into the mirror, the voice returned. Not hers, not the world's, but the one that saved her. I see the real you. And still, I call you mine. There's a strange silence that follows transformation. Not the loud, explosive kind shown in movies, but the quiet, awkward pause when you step out of the old but aren't yet confident in the new. That's where Eliana found herself. Caught between the past she no longer belonged to and the future she had yet to step into. The voices that used to control her, those of insecurity, shame, and the need to prove, still whispered, but now they had competition. A louder, stronger whisper was growing inside her. One of love, of belonging, of grace. But that didn't mean the war was over. In fact, it was just beginning. 1 week after that night in the chapel, Eliana stood in front of her apartment window, watching the city lights flicker below. Her apartment was spotless, too spotless. She'd cleaned for hours, a desperate attempt to avoid the rising ache inside her chest. She had prayed. She had worshipped. She had even cried again. But tonight fell dry, silent. She whispered toward the ceiling. "Where are you now?" No answer. Not like before. No words. No whisper. Just silence. And in that silence, an old lie slipped back in like a thief through a cracked door. He left. You imagined it all. She clenched her jaw. "No," she said out loud. "No, I didn't." But the doubt didn't back down. It crouched beside her like an unwelcome guest. The undoing had begun, not just of her image or her schedule, but of every false foundation she had ever built her identity upon. The next morning, she sat with her journal open, but the pages remained blank. She had so much to say and no strength to say it. So she put on her shoes and left. She didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't stay still. Blocks passed beneath her feet. Coffee shops, bookstores, strangers. And then a church bell rang. She looked up. A new chapel, not the one she had visited before. This one was older, smaller. She hadn't noticed it before. Without thinking, she walked in. The smell of old wood and wax welcomed her. A choir practiced softly in the distance. She sat in the back and breathed in the silence. Then she spoke without planning it. "Why did you go silent on me?" No response, not even a flicker in her spirit. But then someone sat down beside her. A woman, maybe in her 50s, hair pulled back, eyes kind. "You're looking for something," the woman said gently, as if she had known Eliana for years. Eliana nodded. "I thought I found it, but now I don't feel it." The woman smiled. "Feeling isn't faith. Feeling is the echo, but faith is the choice." Eliana stared. "How do you know?" The woman pointed to her chest. "Because I've sat where you're sitting. I've loved him, and I've doubted him. But he never left. It just felt that way while he was digging something deeper." She stood to leave, placing a hand briefly on Eliana's shoulder. "Keep going. The silence isn't abandonment, it's invitation." And then she was gone. That night, Eliana returned home and didn't ask for a feeling. She simply sat in silence and said, "I trust you, even if I feel nothing. I trust you're undoing things I never had the courage to face." And that night, something returned, not a voice but peace. She slept for the first time in days without nightmares. Days passed, then weeks. Eliana began noticing the gaps, the things she used to numb pain. Hours on social media, late-night hookups masked as connection, shopping for the sake of control, overworking to avoid loneliness. She had given those things up, But now the pain they used to silence began to rise. Memories resurfaced of her father walking out, of her best friend's betrayal in high school, of the boyfriend who used her and left her with more scars than she admitted. At first, she tried to push them back down, but then the voice returned, "Let me in." So she did. One by one, she pulled each memory into the light. She cried. She screamed. She wrote pages that made no sense. But she refused to run anymore, because she was learning that healing didn't come from pretending the pain wasn't real. It came from inviting God into the middle of it. One night, she walked to her mirror. This time, not to critique her face or fake a smile. She looked straight into her own eyes. "I forgive you," she whispered. "I forgive you for letting people treat you like you were disposable, for staying silent when you should have screamed, for trying to become what they wanted instead of protecting who you are." She paused. "And I'm sorry for abandoning you, for not listening, for being your own worst enemy." Then she breathed deep and said the words that cracked something wide open. "You're worthy of love." And I finally believe him when he says he sees you. She began to dream again, not just at night, but while awake. She dreamed of helping others like her. She dreamed of speaking, writing, telling her story, not for fame, but for freedom. One day, she walked into a women's shelter and asked if they needed volunteers. They said yes. And that first day, as she sat across from a girl not much younger than her, who flinched at every sound, Eliana simply whispered, "You're safe here. I see you." And the girl looked up with tears in her eyes and whispered, "No one's ever said that to me." Eliana smiled. "Someone said it to me first." She was being undone. Not destroyed, but rebuilt. And through every silent night, every step backward, every moment of doubt and healing, one truth remained. He saw her. And still, he called her his. Healing isn't linear. Some days feel like breakthroughs. Others feel like betrayal. And sometimes, just when you think you've made it through the worst, life reminds you what breaking feels like. That reminder came for Eliana on a quiet Sunday. It had been nearly 3 months since the night she heard the voice that changed everything. Her days now moved with intention. She volunteered twice a week at the shelter, joined a support group, and even started a private blog. A raw collection of her journey that she never shared publicly but knew one day she would. She prayed. She journaled. She cried. And through it all, she had begun to believe. Maybe she really was loved. Maybe she really was chosen. But then came the call. It was just past midnight when her phone buzzed. The screen read, "Mom." She stared at it. Her relationship with her mother was complicated, loving but distant. Her mother never knew how to talk about pain. She only knew how to cover it. "Hello," Eliana whispered. "Eliana," her mom said, breathless. "Your uncle. He's in the hospital. Heart attack. They don't think he'll make it." Eliana's breath caught. Uncle Javi. The man who raised her when her father left. The man who fixed her bike, braided her hair when she was little, who hugged her when no one else did. The one person who made her feel safe before God ever whispered. "I'm coming," she said. The next morning, she boarded the earliest flight to her hometown, a small city she hadn't returned to in over 5 years. As the plane descended, memories began to rise like smoke. Old streets, old schools, old wounds. The very air smelled like her childhood. And suddenly, all the progress she thought she had made felt fragile. The hospital waiting room was sterile and cold. Her mom sat in the corner, biting her nails. Cousins, distant relatives, and family friends whispered prayers. Eliana approached the nurse's station. "I'm his niece," she said. "Can I see him?" The nurse hesitated. "He's not conscious." "But yes." Just for a moment. Eliana stepped inside the room and stopped. There he was, pale, wires everywhere. A machine beeped steadily, tubes in his mouth. His chest barely moved. Her heart shattered. She approached the bed slowly, afraid to speak. "Hey, it's me," she whispered. "Uncle Javi, I'm here." No response. Tears poured. "I'm sorry I didn't visit sooner. I'm sorry I left and never looked back. But I'm here now." She reached for his hand. It was cold, and in that moment, the silence screamed. Where was God now? She returned to the hotel that night broken. Her chest ached. Her heart was heavy. The city outside glowed in neon, but she saw no light. She dropped to her knees and cried out, "Where are you now? Why did you let this happen? I thought you healed. I thought you comforted. Why does this feel like abandonment all over again?" But this time, there was no voice. Only silence. No words. No whisper. No divine presence like before. Only pain. She curled up on the hotel room floor and shook. Why would you bring me all this way just to watch it fall apart again? And then came the lie. You're not chosen. You're cursed. Look around. Everyone you love breaks. She almost believed it. Until the next morning. She returned to the hospital. Her uncle was still unconscious. Machines still buzzing. She sat beside him and whispered, "Do you know I found God? That he found me? That I'm trying to believe I'm not worthless anymore." Silence. She held his hand. "I hope you hear me." That's when a nurse walked in. Young, bright eyes, clipboard in hand. "You're Eliana, right?" Eliana nodded. The nurse smiled. "Your uncle talks about you. Said you were the brave one. The fighter." Eliana blinked. "He said that? All the time. Said you had more strength in your little finger than most people do in their whole body. He said God must have something big planned for you. He believed that." Eliana's breath caught. Even unconscious, he was reminding her who she was. That night, she walked the quiet streets near the hospital. No music, no podcast, just silence and her thoughts. Until she passed a church. Tiny, almost hidden. A light was on inside. She hesitated, then stepped in. There were no worship teams. No fancy lights. Just a cross. A few candles. An old wooden bench. And peace. She sat down. Her voice cracked. "I'm still angry, God, but I'm also still here." And in the stillness, a whisper. "I never left. I was holding you the whole time." Eliana sobbed. The voice returned, not to fix the pain, but to sit with her in it. And for the first time, she realized God doesn't only show up in the breakthroughs. He's in the breaking, in the ICU, in the silence, in the loss, in the chaos, in the room where your voice cracks and your fists shake. He was there. 2 days later, her uncle passed peacefully. She held his hand as the machines quieted. And as the tears came, she whispered, "Thank you for giving me time to say goodbye." She returned home a week later, changed. Not just healed, but whole. Because she had met God at her lowest point again. And he had called her mine all over again. Grief is not the end. Sometimes it's the doorway to a new kind of life. Eliana returned home from her uncle's funeral with eyes that had seen too much pain and a heart that had been quietly remade in the fire. She was no longer the woman who needed to be perfect. She was no longer running. She was no longer numb. Instead, she was open, tender, and awake. It began with a single email. "Hi, Eliana. We came across your blog. Your post titled, 'When God Finds You on the Floor,' touched our entire team. Would you be interested in speaking at our women's gathering next month? No pressure, but we believe your voice matters." She read it 3 times before she could breathe again. Her blog had never been publicized. She only shared it with a few friends. Somehow, it had reached people she didn't know. She paced her apartment, heart racing. Speak about her pain, publicly. The old voice returned. "You're not qualified. You're still healing. You're still broken." But the newer voice rose louder this time. "That's why you're perfect for this. Because you know what it means to bleed and still breathe." She closed her eyes, then whispered, "Yes." The following weeks were a blur. She prepared not with polished words, but with prayer. Not with rehearsed speeches, but with journal entries, raw confessions, scriptures that once saved her from the edge. She was terrified, but she showed up. The gathering was held in a small church hall filled with women of all ages. Some wore makeup and heels. Others wore the weight of grief on their faces. But in every pair of eyes, Eliana saw herself. She stepped onto the small stage. Lights dim, microphone humming. She took a breath and began. "I used to think being strong meant never showing weakness, never letting anyone see the scars, the broken pieces. But now I know the strongest thing I ever did was fall apart in front of God and let him love me anyway." The room went still. I wore a mask for years. I smiled when I wanted to scream. I said, I'm fine when I was anything but. I thought if people saw the real me, they'd walk away. But I was wrong. She paused. Because Jesus saw me at my lowest. And he didn't leave. He stayed. He didn't say, fix yourself first. He said, I'll sit in the dark with you until you're ready to rise. Eyes welled up across the crowd. I thought I had to earn his love. Prove I was worth saving. But he saved me before I even knew how to ask. And every day since, he's reminded me of one thing. I see the real you. And still, I call you mine. That night, Eliana stayed after the gathering for hours. One by one, women approached her. Some with tears, some with trembling hands, some with broken stories they had never spoken aloud before. One woman, in her 60s, whispered, I thought I was the only one. Eliana smiled. You never were. After that night, the invitations kept coming. Not because she was eloquent, but because she was honest. She never preached from perfection. She spoke from pain, and from the place where Jesus met her in it. She told stories about crying on the kitchen floor, about sitting beside her dying uncle, about learning to love herself without needing a mask. And every time, someone new found freedom, but not everyone understood. Old friends questioned her change. Some said she was being too emotional. Others accused her of using religion to cope, and a part of her felt the sting, until she remembered she wasn't doing this for applause. She was doing it because she owed it to the girl she used to be, the one who thought silence was safer than truth. And even more, she owed it to God, because he hadn't saved her for secrecy. He had rescued her for purpose. Months passed. Eliana began mentoring women one-on-one. She helped them journal through trauma. She prayed with those too broken to believe. She sat beside them in silence when there were no words. And every time, she whispered the words that had once saved her. You're not too far gone. He sees you, and he still calls you his. One night, after a long day of ministry, Eliana sat alone on her balcony under the stars. A soft wind brushed her face. She closed her eyes and said, God, how did we get here? And he answered, gently, yet clear. You let me love the real you, and you stopped hiding. She wept, not from sadness, but from joy, because now she knew she didn't have to strive to be loved. She already was, not because of what she did, but because of who she was to him. That night, she opened her journal and wrote, I once thought my story disqualified me, but now I see it's the very thing he's using to heal others. I'm not ashamed of the scars, because they point to the one who saved me, and he calls me mine. God doesn't just heal to restore. He heals to release. And for Eliana, the time had come. It had been nearly a year since the night she collapsed on her kitchen floor and whispered, If you're real, do you even see me? Now, she stood in front of hundreds of women at a national women's conference. A spotlight bathed the stage. Worship had just ended. The air was electric with expectation. And yet, she wasn't nervous. She felt peace. Because this wasn't a performance. It was obedience. And she wasn't doing it for approval. She was doing it because she couldn't keep quiet anymore. She stepped up to the microphone, looked out at the faces before her, and began, There was a time I thought I had to be perfect to be loved. That if people saw the real me, the scared me, the ashamed me, the angry, anxious, messy, hurting me, they would walk away. I was wrong. Because Jesus didn't wait for me to fix myself. He didn't flinch in my darkness. He didn't shame my brokenness. He stepped into it. She paused. Let the words sink in. He found me when I was at my worst. And he didn't just rescue me. He redeemed me. He rebuilt me. And he gave me a voice again. A tear slipped down her cheek. And now, I stand here to tell you. He sees the real you too. The you behind the mask. The you behind the smile. The you no one else gets to see. And he's not walking away. He's whispering the same thing to you he whispered to me. I still call you mine. The crowd erupted into tears. Some women dropped to their knees. Some reached for each other's hands. Some simply covered their mouths as sobs broke through years of silence. The Holy Spirit was present, and he was moving through every broken place. That night, after the altar call, women waited in line to hug her. Many didn't even speak, they just wept in her arms. But one young woman stood out, barely 20, eyes red, a sleeve pulled low to hide scars. She stepped forward and whispered, "I was going to take my life tonight." Eliana's heart stopped. "But then I heard you say he sees the real you." And I needed to hear that. I needed to know I didn't have to keep hiding. Eliana hugged her tightly. "You're not alone," she whispered. "He's just getting started with your life." And she meant it. That night, alone in her hotel room, Eliana knelt at the foot of her bed, tears streaming, hands trembling, not from fear, but from awe. "God," she whispered, "thank you for not giving up on me when I gave up on myself. Thank you for calling me mine, even when I didn't know who I was." And he answered, not with volume, but with eternity in his voice. "I chose you before the world ever told you who to become. I saw you before pain rewrote your name. You're not who they said you were. You're mine. And now, I'm sending you." That was the moment it changed. Eliana wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was a vessel, a voice, a warrior. She quit her corporate job 2 weeks later, not out of recklessness, out of calling. She started a nonprofit called Seen and Still Chosen, a ministry for women who felt forgotten, abused, ashamed, or abandoned. She led support groups, hosted healing retreats, traveled to churches, sat in prisons, held the hands of suicidal girls, and whispered the words that had once pulled her out of the grave. He sees the real you. And still, he calls you mine. Years passed. The ministry grew. But more importantly, so did Eliana. She no longer feared being seen. She no longer flinched when memories returned. She no longer let shame narrate her story. Because now she knew every scar had become sacred. One evening, after returning from a revival in another city, Eliana sat on her porch with her Bible in her lap. She looked out over the quiet street as the sun set in hues of gold and violet. And she smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because she finally knew who she was. Not a failure, not forgotten, not broken beyond repair, but chosen, loved, seen. And that was enough. She opened her Bible and read aloud. "But now, this is what the Lord says. He who created you, do not fear, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine." Tears filled her eyes, and she whispered one last time, "Thank you for seeing the real me and still calling me yours."